Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 696. Today we're going to talk about Kings of War Vanguard. This is from Mantic Games. This one came out a couple of years ago, but if you're watching this in real time, this is part of Skirmish Week, the first of 3 videos I'm going to be doing this week, which will end in my top 10 skirmish games of all time. I've been trying to kind of go through and learn and learn about all these different skirmish games that are out there because I'm really a big fan of them. And one of them I really wanted to get to was Kings of War Vanguard. Not to spoil anything, but it might show up in my top 10 list. But what this game is a 2 to 4 player skirmish game. Most of the scenarios that you play will be a 2-player game, but there's campaigns and campaign supplements like this one here, Ice and Iron, you can do campaigns up to 3 and 4 players, and some of the scenarios will involve a 3 or 4 player match. But mostly it's your traditional kind of fantasy skirmish 2-player game, a la Mordheim or Frostgrave, that kind of thing. So let's jump into the table. I've got 2 warbands here, the Basileans and the Abyssal Dwarves that I've played, and I'll give you kind of a rundown of them, a little bit of how to kind of get into the game, some of the mechanics of the game and that kind of thing, and then I'll talk some more details there, but then we'll come back and I'll tell you what I think of the game. So there are a couple of kind of components beyond the rule book here and the miniatures that you're going to want to get started with the game. Now there is a 2-player starter set which has come out after I've had a chance to get into this game. So you can get that, and that should cover all of your bases. But right now what they have offering, if you don't get the starters, you can get the rule book by itself. You can get here the Ice and Iron kind of campaign book, and this adds some extra little rules a little bit, mostly geared around doing a campaign and a bunch of new scenarios and that kind of stuff, a little bit of narrative to get kind of sink your teeth into. And the other piece here, which you shouldn't necessarily have to buy separately, are these cards. Now as I said there, I have 2 factions, the Basileans and the Abyssal Dwarves, and each of the different units and things comes with a card representing that unit, as well as there are also cards here for the different kind of special faction abilities. And so you can see here we've got some special abilities and some of the faction specific spells. Now if you notice here on this card there is a V1.1. So they went through and they made a decent stack of cards that you can get separately but really cheaply, which updates a bunch of different faction abilities as well as different creatures and things like that up to the 1.1. So their kind of faction update just requires you to buy a very small cheap pack of cards that updates unit stats and so on, and sometimes updates their point cost, which you can see there in the upper right hand corner. So let's just take a closer look at some of the stats here on a card. It's typical miniature skirmish stuff, but let's take a look. So a few different things. You can see the miniature picture, the faction icon, the number of points, the base size there. Then you've got speed stat, which is how many inches they can move. Their melee, which is they want to roll 3+ or 5+ in a ranged. And range is also used for spells. So if this were to be a caster, there'd be a list of spells that they knew here. And then if the spell targeted and went off, then you would just use their range stat. It's kind of interchangeable. And then you've got the armor, which so if they get hit, then you need to roll a 5+ in this case. You've got the nerve, which I'll get into a little bit. You use this for a couple different things. Then you have wounds here. And then you have their height, which is used to kind of check certain things. Certain special abilities and things will involve kind of comparing the height. And you kind of will use that to do line of sight. So you can use it to say like certain buildings or structures or something are height 2. So maybe if you see their sword poking above it, then you say, well, no, you can't see it because they're both height 2 and it's blocking. You can just kind of use that as a quick kind of reference. And then you can see it's got different attacks and things. So when they're ranged, they'll roll 1d8. On melee, they'll roll 4d8, their alignment, and so on, other special abilities. So that's kind of the general gist of the card. And since I mentioned d8 here, this is a d8 based game. So when you're trying to roll here, to let's say, see if you do get a melee attack, and you got a melee attack, you roll 48, so we're going to roll 4 of those, and we need to get a 3+ there. So there we would have gotten 2 hits. 1s are always a fail, and then 8s are going to explode. 8s are always succeed, and then you can re-roll another die on top of that. And if you roll 8 again, then it'll keep exploding. And an attack is very simple. If like I'm doing a melee attack on you, and then let's say we're doing on this guy here, so you can see his armor is a 4+. Let's say I got 2 hits, then I would need to roll 2 d8s, and then if I got a 4+, let's see, I would not block none of those. And there are different types of units here, so let's take a look. So if we take a look at this guy here, this man-at-arms, he's a Basilian grunt. Okay, you can see he's got 1 wound. All the grunts have 1 wound. Whereas other types, like this guy's a command, he has 3 wounds. So if this guy takes damage, then he's just going to be killed. Whereas this one here, he's going to take wounds down until he gets to 0, at which point then he's going to roll against his nerve. If he fails his nerve, then he's going to get removed. Otherwise, he's just going to get knocked down and he'll have to stand back up on his next action, or if he gets attacked again and he's knocked down, then he'll get removed. So even if you get somebody down to 0, if they're not a grunt, then there's a chance for them to kind of resist that with a nerve test. The other time that you use a nerve test here is if you get to less than half the total figures of your warband, then everybody's gonna have to start taking nerve tests, or else they're gonna turn and kind of make a run action away and start to flee. So it's effectively like a morale test that you've seen in a lot of other games. So the last thing to kind of note about these unit cards here is, again, you can see the type. So this is a large, this is the Charnock, so it's a big old kind of behemoth here, which I'll show you in more detail later. It's a big old guy there with a giant gun. So he's a large. And then we have here a command. So you need at least 1 command unit, and then the number of supports and larges and other command units that you can have is going to depend on the number of warriors and grunts. And depending on the point value of game that you're playing to, average is like a 200 point game. You can go down to 100, up to 400 if you want. You need a certain number of warriors or grunts, and that will unlock your ability to put in extra special ones like supports and large units and so on. So that's really the only warband building requirements, is that you stay under a certain number of points, and then you have a certain number of these kind of basic units that will sort of allow you to unlock these more specialized units here, like supports and so on. Now the last thing about cards, which aren't required here, is this deck of equipment cards. And you can get this also, it's a pretty cheap deck of cards. And you have various different kinds of equipment: common, rare, and then unique here. And this is just a good reference to have, and you can keep it off to the side. This is the number of gold that it's going to cost you, which is the same as points. So if you're just kind of buying up and you've got like a couple extra points to kind of fill out your warband, you can go through here. And there's some rules for the number of rares and uniques you can add in. And this will change a little bit if you're trying to do it as a campaign. You've got like a phase in between games to sort of buy extra equipment and so on. And again, the rules are going to change a little bit based on that type of equipment. So before I jump into the gameplay, I just want to give you kind of an idea of what the miniatures look like painted by an amateur. So this is my Abyssal Dwarf warband, and what you can see here is basically like 2 sort of boxes worth. And I did some pricing out of some of the other warbands, and it basically seems to fit about in this ballpark, which is actually really nice. So what you can see here is actually a Abyssal Dwarf warband set. You can see this one comes with 14 miniatures, but there's also here kind of a warband booster, and those are some of these more specialized miniatures here, like this big iron golem guy with the gun, this hexcaster thing which has this flame kind of shooting out of its head, and then this fella here, which is I believe the Abyssal Lord there. So if you typically get the warband box here and plus the booster, and I've got here, I don't have the boxes for the boosters because in the move, I'd recently moved, those boxes kind of went away, but here's the warband set for the Basilian. So I have that. I'll show you these guys in a second. But if you get just that plus the booster, and then I would say even probably for the Abyssal Dwarves, it's probably worth picking up a caster. You know, get a spellcaster. But this will take you to about, I don't remember the exact points, I added them up the other day, about 350 points per each, and I priced out a couple of the other warbands and it's about the same. So if you get those 2 boxes, you're basically good to go. And you've got your warband here. So anyway, these guys are just, you know, typical kind of Abyssal Dwarves. They kind of remind me of the old Chaos Dwarves. A little bit different aesthetic, of course, but you got a bunch of shooters and stuff. You got these little hounds there, this big guy, the hexcaster, some of these bigger, cooler warriors there. They don't have a caster in the box, but they have some other cool tricks. Like this guy's really a beast, although, you know, he can go down quickly, but he's got really good melee and good kind of area effect blast with that big gun. This guy here, the hexcaster, this little kind of firebug, will actually drain the other side of command points. And so that's an interesting thing. I'll talk about command points when I talk about gameplay. But they do have some kind of interesting tricks up their sleeves. So a caster isn't necessary, and most of the time you're going to be playing 200 point games, you know, maybe 300 point games. If you wanted a full 400 point game, then there's definitely room enough to flesh out what you've got here with equipment to get to 400 points anyway. But I would say maybe a caster is a good idea for that above and beyond the box. Now let's take a look at the Basileans. So these guys are your typical human paladin looking guys. There's this ogre guy who's in armor, who's kind of their big version guy. He's a pretty tough melee guy. They've cut a couple of archers here. We've got some different mixed genders here. A lot of women folk and so on, and a couple of these cats in the back, which are pretty cool. And the same kind of idea here is you get about 360 points, I think, with this one. And again, there is a caster. I actually built a couple of casters in here. They're kind of paladin casters. So you don't really need anything else. Maybe, I don't know what else to grab, honestly. I haven't thought too much about it, but you could probably flesh this out with 1 or 2 more models, maybe. But you get a couple of the leaders here. So all of these are the warband, except for these 2 folks here. Got this kind of mysterious lady there, and the big ogre, and then this kind of big leader guy. I think he was the other one that came in the booster box. And they've got a whole bunch of ranges of different factions, good, evil, some neutral factions. There's kind of a new ogre faction that they've refreshed just recently in the last couple of days, which looks pretty cool. But anyway, that's kind of a gist of some of the miniatures. Now they do also have this terrain crate box. Now some of this is not really necessary, but some of the scenarios in the book kind of mention specific terrain. I kind of scattered them somewhere around here. So you got these big stones here, little stones. You've got some like little munitions there. This is kind of a neat thing. You've got a pile of wood that you have to set on fire, so the fire comes off there and you can set it on fire like that. You've got this sort of killed horse and rider, little stump there. Let's see if we can get into there. Yeah, we've got a lady in here who's kind of tied up in distress. You can see there's like little weapons caches. Here's a dragon egg. Another little kind of weapons cache back there. I like to have like little things like this anyway, just to kind of add to the battlefield, to kind of give it a little bit more realism and life. But it's cool to have kind of things like this to kind of just call it, oh, this is the objective marker. We're trying to get the dragon egg or this weapon supply or something, or secret documents that are in this treasure chest. Although I will say, I painted up all this stuff. The plastic that's on these is a little bit strange and kind of repellent to paint. I don't know if I needed a different kind of primer or what, but it was something I kind of had to go over a little bit. I had no problems painting the normal miniatures there. They just fine, like any miniature. But this terrain was a little bit funky. Like I had to kind of go over it twice. I don't know what, maybe it was a weird batch or something for me, but I've not seen anything like that. It was kind of, had trouble holding the paint. But it's just a little terrain objective, so I got it to where it is, and I think it's fine. Let's talk real briefly about gameplay. One thing that I like about it is the scenarios are very objective driven. It's not necessarily just wipe out the other team, which is something I love. Now the first thing you're going to do each round is you're going to roll these command dice. Now these are sort of proprietary dice. However, the dice that will come probably with the starter box are these swords. Now they do have other games in some of their systems from Mantic that, like I got these out of the Walking Dead game, that are the exact same dice. The red dice match the red dice, but instead of swords, they just have these little kind of blast hit markers. But the distribution of successes and everything is the same. So if you've got another one of their games, I know the Walking Dead game works, there might be another one, but they've kind of grown the system of this command dice and command points out of the second edition of Dead Zone, which is another game that I really enjoy. So the first thing you do, you're going to roll a certain number of these each turn. Now, to start with, everybody gets 3 red dice, which are the weakest. Now through various different cards, let's take a look back here at the dictator, you can see he will add these to that. So this will add you another red and a white. So we're going to add another red here, we're going to add a white, and maybe you've got another character, another command character that adds you a blue. So both players are going to roll these, and then we're going to get a certain number. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now for each character with the command ability, like this guy here, you can re-roll one of these dice. So we got a blank here on this red, so we'll re-roll that. Bam, we got 2 more. So if I had another command character, I could re-roll that dice. Once that character is killed and removed from the battlefield, then I can't, I lose that re-roll, and I lose those dice that I added to the pool. So you're just going to kind of count this up, and let's say I got 2, 4, 6, 8 there. So I have 8 command points now for the round. Now you can spend, this is really where this game kind of comes alive, is you can spend those command points throughout the course of the round. You're going to lose them at the end of the round, and you're going to re-roll the allotted dice there at the start of your next turn. Now there's a variety of things you can do with those command points. One thing you can do is kind of like group activate. So if you had a group of soldiers together, typically you're going to go alternating back and forth. I'll activate this guy, he'll move and attack or do whatever he's going to do. But I can activate them as a group, so they could do a group shoot, a group assault, which is like a charge, and so on. Or I can maybe activate a guy and then spend a command point to activate another guy. Now, not everything costs 1 command point. Sometimes things cost 2 command points. One thing you can do in this game, which is really neat, is you can do what's called a fatigue action. So normally you get 2 actions on a turn. Well, I should say you get 2 short actions. You can take 1 long action. So for example, if I was going to do a run, which is a long action, and I wanted to get this character, well, let's get a realistic thing here. Let's get this guy in play. If I wanted to do a run, I can do double movement up and 2 and get into melee, encountering the enemy. So that would take up my whole turn, but I'll get a free attack out of that. Or I can just do a run and not get into melee range with anybody. But typically you can do a walk and then you can do another walk. But in that case, you can't get into melee range with somebody because you didn't take the run action. Or I could do, if I was this guy here, I could do a walk and a shoot. Those are 2 short actions. Now I can also, like I was saying, do a fatigue action, which will make them fatigued for the next round. So you can see this little marker I put there. They give you a whole bunch of these different little markers if you get the marker pack or if you get the 2-player starter set. So these are a bunch of like activation markers here, so you can just put them like that. Or you got little wound tokens, and there's a variety of different effects tokens and things like that. But the one you really want to keep an eye on is this fatigue action here. So what that is, you kind of squeeze out a third action out of this guy, but at the start of the next turn you can only do 1 short action because you've kind of eaten up your future action. And so then you just do your 1 action, like maybe move, and then this will go away, and that's all you can do. But you can spend power in a couple of different ways to kind of do a forced fatigue action. So if I'm activating this guy and I can force fatigue this other guy here to squeeze another action out of them, and then at the end of the round you can also spend power to eat up fatigue actions. So it becomes kind of a little bit of a chess match, almost like a game of chicken in some ways, to use that power, and you're going to sort of try to figure out, are they going to try to get that extra little move action out of there, a little take another shot, that kind of thing, because they've got power in reserve. And also some other things that you can do with power is maybe you can add dice to your dice pool. So I can spend another power to add another die to my dice pool when I make an attack. Some of the special abilities on the different models will require spending a power point as well. So there's a real kind of resource management and juggling beyond just kind of positional movement and tactical stuff. And again, everything's kind of on a D8. I explained that already. You're going to resolve it round to round. The scenario is going to tell you what the objectives are, and what some of the maybe special rules are and things like that, and how you're going to go about winning the game and how victory points are allotted. So I did want to show you one last thing before I go to the review part, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of a good skirmish game. I've talked about the mechanics and so on, but let's talk a little bit about kind of the post-game stuff here. And one thing, here we go, this is what I want to talk about, is having a retinue. So if you think of a game like Kill Team or even Frostgrave or Relic Blade, for example, there is this idea of retinues. And so you have here various specialists, basically, that you can start to assign over the course of the campaign. And this will unlock certain abilities. Only certain types of models can have certain things, like a Master Scout here. They have to be a scout already. And as you sort of play through the game, and the campaign systems will give you rules on when you can do this and what happens when they die and so on. And these will give you just extra bonuses and kind of individualize your characters a little bit more. So that's kind of a nice addition. So that I just wanted to show you this because there is this kind of level of depth. And so you're going to be rolling on tables in between games. So maybe you got extra events that happen in between games. You're going to go and be able to spend money. You've got different XP costs for different ranks and so on. And how you get XP is detailed in here and so on. If your character went out of action, you'll roll on the casualty table. They can die, they can get injuries and so on. And they do give you kind of a general outline here of how to kind of play a campaign. So in the base book here, in the starter book, they give you the kind of a real easy to do 2-player campaign. And so you can do this and this, and it builds a nice kind of loose narrative through all of the different scenarios to figure out, who won the campaign. Now, if you get the Fire and Ice and Iron supplement here, this will give you a straight up 2 to 4 player campaign, and they do a similar thing here. You can see it sort of sets the structure up here, but what I want you to see here is they have a similar kind of campaign flow for 2, 3, and then a 4-player game. And there is some suggestions for the factions that players should take. So you could have, and even in like a 3-player campaign, you could have one player as good, and then the other side as a neutral and an evil player, or 2 evil players, and that kind of thing. And so you kind of set up the points here, you know, for going into each game, and it gives you kind of a cool narrative thing. But the idea that I like behind this is these are just sort of templates to help you set up and sort of piece together a narrative sort of campaign scenario. So if you wanted to sort of, after you played through these, you could say, okay, well, what if we had a situation like this and that? Okay, well, we could play this scenario, maybe do a little tweak there, and then that means that we should probably try this other scenario. So you can kind of just play. I think there's a total of 12 scenarios in this book, and I think there's 12 in this book too. Oh no, there's only 7 in this one, but some of the campaign stuff refers back to the scenarios in the original. So it gives you kind of a good blueprint for kind of working out a narrative kind of thing. And I like how it presents the different approaches based on the different player counts, even the odd player count. And it's probably very easily extensible once you go beyond 4 players to figure that out and kind of get that going. So this is a really cool way that this is presented. Okay, so that was Kings of War Vanguard. Let's quickly go over my pillars of reviews because they don't really apply to miniature skirmish games player count. I've only played it 2-player, and frankly, this is lockdown when I'm making this video, so I've only played it solo, 2-handed 2-player. I haven't tried a chance, obviously, to try it with 3 or 2 or 3 or 4 players. So yeah, it seems like it'd probably be fun though with like a kind of a King of the Hill free-for-all with 4 players. The play time, I'd say your scenarios are probably going to take you probably less than an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Kind of depends, because some of the scenarios are a little bit bigger. I've not played anything larger than or smaller than the 200-point game. If you played like a 100-point game, you could easily get a scenario done in probably half an hour. I mean, once you kind of know the game and kind of get the flow of it and all that kind of stuff. There is a kind of not a learning curve, but just sort of an adaptation curve, I guess you could call it. And this will kind of move me into what is this game like. Well, obviously it's like Mordheim and Frostgrave and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that kind of sets it apart is that whole command ability thing, which kind of first kind of showed up in Dead Zone, especially the 2nd edition of Dead Zone. So in terms of the playtime and learning the game, rolling those command dice, getting those command points, and then kind of figure out when to spend them. I found that the first time I played it, I largely ignored the command dice, especially in the first couple of rounds. And then, once the figures are close to each other, then you start spending it on extra dice and, group activations and stuff like that. But depending on the scenario, sometimes it's a good idea to not forget to spend them in the first round, even to maybe move a guy a little bit closer to an objective, and based on how the train's set up, I can move him a little bit further, get him hidden over here, send these guys up, and then they're going to be fatigued, but they're going to gain kind of a useful position on the battlefield and all that kind of stuff. So it's not something you really should ignore even in the first round of the game, kind of depending, I think, on the scenario a little bit there. So that kind of curve of knowing like what's all the stuff I can do with power that the command dice give me, all the things that I can do, group activate. You can do like a force fatigue. You want to save some to remove fatigue. So then, okay, well, who should I fatigue and when? Adding the dice for combat, saving some to do that and that kind of stuff, or maybe doing that extra model activation out of turn. And then maybe you have abilities that, require the command dice as well. So that kind of learning curve, or that kind of part of the game is really the learning curve. The rest of the game is pretty simple. You roll the d8s, and then you get your 2-hit number, and you roll the armor, blah blah blah. That goes on and on. There is a fair amount of keywords on the unit cards. So the unit cards will have special abilities that will describe the whole special ability. So you've got it all right there on the card. There is a good file that I should have shown during the walkthrough, but that you can go and print out. I think I found it on Board Game Geek, where you can print out all the keywords. So like crushing, for example, if a unit has crushing 2, when they hit you, that will sort of effectively be like rend, where that will reduce their armor by 2, so they've got to roll 2 higher. to be able to get the armor. So that's something that's easy to memorize, because like, I don't know, all the guys I have crushing of some degree, and other ones will have different, so there's a lot of keywords. So you probably will want to print out a sheet that has all the things you can do with power, which is like 10 or 12 things, and then all the keywords, so you know what those are, and then you're good to go. And there is good player aids, and all that stuff is in the back here. So I know that on a Mantic site they do have like the player aid and stuff like that in here for what you can do on your turn. Other than that, it plays a lot like any other kind of skirmish game. And the thing to me that kind of sets this one apart from other games, at least right now, is in terms of sort of the production or the ergonomics of the game. Because like I showed you, it's pretty easy to get in and get a fully kind of well-rounded, fleshed out warband, which isn't always the case with some of the other games that are out there. Sometimes you got to go and buy this one and get this box, and you only need 2 things out of that box and that kind of thing. So this gives you a pretty well-rounded group of units between the warband set and the warband booster. You get some of your more funky specialized guys in there, and then you're kind of good to go. And you've got more than you need for just random pickup games or random competitive games. If you're going to just, pick scenarios and play your 200-point head-to-head matches and build out and optimize your list or whatever as much as you can, you've got all the stuff you can do for that. But they give you enough between the 2 boxes that you can kind of build things in narratively, like I showed you with some of the specialists or the retinue guys and that kind of stuff. And so there's that aspect of the presentation, the production part of it. But then I really like how they have laid out all of the campaign stuff here, because like I talked about in the walkthrough, they give you really the great tools for kind of acting as templates to lay out campaigns, but do it in such a structured and narrative templated way that it's very easy to kind of mix and match the pieces and feel like you're playing something that's narratively coherent, but also seems like it should be relatively balanced. Now, obviously, I've not played through all of that, so that may that needs some playthrough to kind of merit that out. But at least the presentation, the production side of it makes it easy to get into. So I feel like if I found an issue with a scenario or something, the amount of victory points that were rewarded, it'd be very easy to kind of tweak that and bake that into the overall campaign rules and the structure of, whoever I was playing with, what we would come up with. So I do think it deserves a little bit of credit, or a lot of credit for that, in terms of how it's presented. But in general, I don't know, there's other like little things that are little nuancy things that are, I don't know how important they are, but I really kind of like them. It's just small details, like, so they're all in square bases, which is, I thought was strange, because I know that the larger game is the larger Kings of War game, which is a big, rank and flank game, which I can't get into those for some reason. I thought, square bases in a skirmish game, what's the deal with that? But facing is actually a really important thing here. So when you have sort of abilities, some of the abilities and things like that that'll come into play here, the facing actually does become important, which on the surface, when I looked at that rule, I was like, ugh, because I'm so used to skirmish games where facing is not important. They can see 360 degrees. But the way that it actually has played out in the couple of games that I've played really has been very interesting in terms of, the ability to kind of activate and be able to turn and stuff like that, or sneak around a character and get behind them, and then kind of charge them from behind, so you get some extra bonus dice for the charge and for being in their flank and all that stuff. And so you can really kind of play with that part of the game and the tactics of that, and that is also kind of a breath of fresh air, is just having facing matter, and the square base thing just makes that super easy to do. And then how the kind of the units will sort of snap together and go into base to base. It's very rank and flank feeling. That's probably the only thing. I don't like rank and flank games generally. I don't know. I have a DNA problem, but the way that they kind of snap together, or you snap to an obstacle or a cover objective to face that way, just kind of that nice. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's this nice little touch that adds a little bit, just a small layer of the tactical element there. And I don't know, the special abilities and stuff like that of the two warbands that I have are really cool. But yeah, the main takeaway for me is the whole power system and the fatigue system, and that kind of, it's almost like a push your luck aspect, or a playing chicken aspect, which Dead Zone kind of had some of that too. But you can really kind of push and pull some levers with that game mechanically, and it kind of sets it apart from really a lot of other skirmish games because it has that kind of resource management layer to it. So anyway, that's Kings of War Vanguard. I definitely recommend it. And if you're into these kind of skirmish games, and Mantic's one of those companies that just seems to kind of fly under the radar a little bit. You know, they're not big like Games Workshop, and you know, they have their own line of stuff, and so, you know, they're not like an Osprey where you can just kind of throw whatever you want at it. Although they have encouraged you being able to use your own miniatures in the past, but I didn't see that literature in here anywhere. I know initially when Kings of War came out and Vanguard, they were saying, no, use whatever you want. But I think these miniatures, their miniature game has definitely improved over the last few years. So I definitely recommend their miniatures. The other bit was, in terms of the miniatures, these are very much like to scale, and I think I read somewhere that you can like basically swap them out with the North Star figures, which are kind of they do the official Frostgrave miniatures, and so the body parts tend to be very swappable. So if you're looking to do like some conversions between either line, either this or North Star, they're really going to kind of lend themselves to it. And I'll definitely grab, you know, a couple of these Ranger gals here and throw them into some Frostgrave warbands just to have some other, you know, humanoid bow users and soldiers in Frostgrave. So anyway, that's Kings of War Vanguard. Definitely take a look at it. Thanks.